Good morning, honorable members. In the absence of our chaplain, we'll ask honorable member for Southern Shores to lead us in the word of prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Good morning once again, honorable members.
Philip Davis, Chester Cooper, Fred Mitchell, Lennis Hannah Martin, Obadiah Wilstrom, Alfred Sayers, Dr. Michael Darville, Clay Sweeting, Keith Bell, Wayne Monroe, Vaughn Miller, Jobeth Colby Davis, Ginger Moxie, Mario Bolag, Jomo Campbell, Basil McIntosh, Miles LaRoda, Pia Glover Rowe, Lisa Ramming, Zane Lightbourne, Dr. Hubert Minnis, Jamal Strawn, John Pinder, Marcus Roll, Leon Lundy, Kirk Cornish, Wade Watson, Leonardo Lightbourne, Leslie Miller Bryce, Leroy Major, Sylvanus Petty, Mikhail Bonnaby, Michael Pintard, James Crazy Thompson, Aram Lewis, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Adrian Gibson, Adrian White.
Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. Communication by the clerk. Message from the Governor General. Message from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign, seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Pinewood.
Mr. Deputy, I beg to introduce and have read for the first time. I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: a bill for an act to provide for the office of the Ombudsman.
Order that the documents be brought up.
Okay.
Is there a seconder? Order that the documents to lie on the table. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read the first time. Which one is it? Well, a bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. Order that the bill be read the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for the office of Ombudsman.
For the first reading. Order that the documents to lie on the table. Second reading of bills. began to. Second reading and committal of bills. Okay. Committee of the whole. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Freetown.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much. Very wise to move the resolution tabled that reads as follows. Whereas the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the United Nations that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights. And whereas the United Nations has also established mechanisms to promote and protect these rights and to assist states in carrying out their responsibilities. And whereas the Parliament of the Bahamas plays a critical role in the country's compliance with its human rights obligation on the international and regional levels. And whereas Parliament is desirous of constituting a committee to comprise of 8 members of Parliament, 5 members of the House of Assembly, and 3 members of the Senate to be responsible for monitoring the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas. Now therefore be resolved that this House approves the constitution of a committee of 5, should be 8, it should really be 8. Oh, sorry. This is 5. A constitution of a committee of 5 members of the House of Assembly to monitor and protect, to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it says Parliament, but it really should say the House of Assembly. To monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee are as follows: to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violation through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm able to speak on this resolution because of the faith and confidence reposed in me by the good people of Freetown. And before I speak formally, I would like to formally give an advance birthday greeting to Florence Ramming, who will be 89 on Friday. She is a great supporter of mine. She loves me and I love her. She regards me as a son, of which I'm very grateful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this concept of human rights can often be seen as mystical and mystifying, and persons often arrive at conclusions that are not accurate, even in the area as simple as our constitutional rights. We often have people speaking of rights in terms of rights being absolute. There is only one absolute right in our Constitution, and that is the right not to be held in slavery and servitude. All other rights are conditioned. And so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so that the Bahamian people can be clear, as to what this committee is set to do. And so they're not led down the garden path by persons who either do not know what the content of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are, or knowing them, purposely mislead as to what their contents are. I intend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not to be very long, but to lay out in the hearing of the Bahamian people the content of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's adopted by the General Assembly. When we, as a nation, 50 years ago, had our march to independence, to nationhood, and we decided to join the United Nations, we signed up to observe this Declaration of Human Rights. And constitutional courts throughout the Bahamas have made it clear that if one looks at our Constitution and looks at what will be read in your hearing now, which is the content of the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they align. And so you will see what is set out in this declaration also in our Constitution. If I may treat then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with one issue, because it's very important in our constitutional construct, the concept of separation of powers. We are very familiar with the fact that the executive cannot dictate to the judiciary, that the judicial function must be separate, and that we have three organs of government: the legislature, which is what we do here, the executive, and the judiciary. From the wording of this resolution, there's no attempt, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to invade the jurisdiction of the judiciary by this resolution. They will still be left as the guardians of our law, the guardians of our right, and this is to report to Parliament the state of affairs, the state of play in the country, and to advise of steps that may be taken and to hold hearings if necessary. With that being said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reads as follows: whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is a foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations. Whereas the people of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms, whereas a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of great importance for the full realization of this pledge. Now, therefore, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all people and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures nationally and internationally to secure their universal and effective recognition and observation, both among the peoples of the member states themselves and amongst the peoples of territory under their jurisdiction. That then, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is the preamble. Nothing alarming in it. It simply speaks to the United Nations having been formed after the atrocities of the Great War and World War II, a desire for there never to be such outrages committed again if we are to follow this Declaration of Rights. So what are the human rights that are declared, Mr. Deputy Speaker? There are, in fact, 30 of them. The first one in Article 1 is that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. There's nothing that I think anyone would have an argument with that. In this country where in our history, people were not born free, where people were born in servitude, where children born to slaves were property of the slave owner. Article 1 is very poignant in that it establishes that no one will own anyone else. And to be quite clear, that means you don't own a woman, you don't own a man. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 2 states, everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. Article 2 is making it quite clear that everyone, regardless of which country you are from, whether you're from the most powerful country in the world, down to a protectorate, as the British still have protectorates in this area, you have the same rights without distinction and without discrimination. I do not think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that any Bahamian would argue against that. Article 3 sets out that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person. Again, I would think that nobody will have any argument with that. Article 4 states that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, given our history, our social history, this article should be very near and dear to us. And that is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Social Services, Royal Bahamas Police Force, Defense Force, Immigration and Customs take human trafficking very seriously, as it is an affront to Article 4 that prohibits slavery or servitude. It is a matter that is taken very seriously, and we will continue to fight the battle until no one anywhere in the world can be said to be held in servitude. Article 5 provides no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Sadly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I cannot say that that one is universally accepted in the Bahamas. Some Bahamians would be quite content for certain persons to be subject to torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, so long as it's not them or their family members. One must remember that these declarations are a reaction to the events that led to the Great War and to World War II. Yes. That should be a wake-up call to us all that we ought not to countenance anything that we would not wish upon ourselves. And even if we were saying that we need higher authority than the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, Matthew 7 sets out not only that you shouldn't judge people, but that exactly the measure in which you judge people is the measure that will be meted out to you. And so you ought not to do to anyone what you do not wish to be done to yourself. These things are not only common sense, they all have biblical origin. Article 6 provides everyone has a right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Simple, straightforward, unarguable. Article 7 provides all are equal before the law and are entitled without discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. And this is the Equal Protection Article. And again, you do not know the value of it until you are seeking the benefit of it. And so we have to be very careful that we understand the need to respect all of these rights. Article 8 provides everyone has the right of an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted him by the Constitution or by the law. It is very important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the courts are there to enforce the law. In this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have had occasion as of late to have had a conversation with the Chief Justice for us to have an understanding that the slow movement of matters through the criminal courts may not be fully living up to Article 8. The Chief Justice, as he said publicly, has committed for us to work together to improve the system so that persons who have the need for remedy before our courts can effectively get it. Article 9, Mr. Deputy Speaker, reads that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. And that is a very important right that we all cherish and would never for ourselves wish to see impinged. Article 10 provides everyone is entitled to everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations or of any criminal charge against him. Justice must be done publicly, although one will find that in limited cases for the protection of vulnerable classes of persons, something that is not fully public is permitted. Article 11, Mr. Deputy Speaker, reads in two parts. Everyone charged with a penal offense shall have the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in a public trial, at which he shall have all the guarantees necessary for his defense. This is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the protection of a presumption of innocence. And bearing in mind that we all live in a country in which we can all be on the receiving end of an allegation. This article provides that, contrary to the system that existed before in some countries, we do not have to prove that we didn't do it. The state has to prove that we did do it. And that is very fundamental, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and none of us knows the importance of it. I've seen it for 30-something years, that the state has a lot of resources. And so the police has a lot of resources, manpower, scientific, technical, with which to accumulate evidence, and the means of the citizen is very small in relation to the means of the state. The state has budgets of millions and millions of dollars to accomplish these things. And when a charge is levied against somebody from Freetown who does not have millions of dollars, who does not have hundreds of thousands of dollars, it is very important for the protection of my constituents and all Bahamians that it is the state who must prove that you are guilty. The second part of Article 11 states, no one shall be held guilty of any penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it was committed, nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the penal offense was committed. Quite frankly, it's very simply that the offense has to have been around at the time you committed it, and you're subject only to the sentence imposed at that point. Article 12 provides, Mr. Deputy Speaker, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interferences or attacks. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a right that is abrogated in this House because the laws of this country provide that when we stand here and speak, and when what we speak to may amount to an assailing the honor and reputation of persons, either persons in this place or persons outside of this place, that there are no legal ramifications for it. That is the privilege that is engaged here. It is distressing that unless we as parliamentarians accept Article 12, that we are not to attack persons' honor and reputation, unless we engage our own honor to understand that the conventions in this place are there for a reason. And the reason is that we occupy a privileged position when we stand on our feet to say things, then we would have difficulties in this place, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Your honor and reputation are important. We were all raised that our names are the only thing that we have. It is indeed distressing when this simple act of civility is not observed. And I confess that I have seen it far too often in the short time that I have been here. Article 13. Article 13 provides everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. This is very important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because we don't want anyone to feel that this declaration provides that anyone can move to any country. You have the right to move about your own country. You have the right to leave your own country. You have no right to enter anybody else's country without their permission, but you have the right to return to your own country. Even this wasn't respected when Bahamians were prevented from returning to the Bahamas during the pandemic. While other countries sent chartered aircraft to return their citizens to their country, in this country, contrary to Article 13, Bahamians were denied entry to their own country. And there was a scandal when we were denied entry to our own country and a foreigner was permitted to enter and bury her dog. It is very fundamental that we understand the nature of human rights, and it is just very clear. Article 14 provides that everyone has the right to see, and you know, it's just very simple. How it works is when you see you fall short, you pick yourself up, you pull yourself up, and you do better. That's how I was raised anyway. Not that anyone is going to be perfect, but that when you fall, you understand why you fall, and you do better. Another way to look at it is, the first priest when I returned to the Anglican Church, Father Santosh Marie, told me that people sin every day, probably every minute. The key is not to love your sin. The key is to understand when you sin, to repent, and to seek to do better. It's as simple as that. When we point out shortcomings, if we say we have no sin, we deceive only ourselves and the truth is not in us. But if we confess, God is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and cleanse us our unrighteousness. And so I would hope that everything we say is taken in this respect. I'm being kind because I'm trying to point out where you fall so you won't fall again. Article 14 provides everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. The right may not be invoked in cases of prosecutions generally arising from non-political crimes or from acts contrary to the purpose and principles of the United Nations. The right of asylum is very specific. It is not based on economic measures, on convenience, or any such thing. The public can be assured of that. Article 15 provides everyone has a right to a nationality. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality or denied the right to change his nationality. And so Bahamians can be deprived of their Bahamian citizenship, but it is not done arbitrarily, and there's compliance so far with Article 15. Issues of how you get this right is for the country. And so the public should be very clear that nothing is dictated to us in this regard. Article 16 provides men and women of full age without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion shall have the right to marry and found a family. They're entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. Secondly, marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intended spouses. Third, the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. The United Nations basically is saying shotgun weddings, as Eddie Minute sang about, can't do that. But they recognize the fundamental nature of the family and that it needs to be protected not only by society itself, but by the state. Again, this is biblical as well. And so the family group is very important. As of late, we have said and highlighted that any breakdown in the family leads to adverse consequences for the society. We are seeing some of the consequences now, and therefore we must, in recognition of the force of Article 16, Subarticle 3, recognize that we need to protect the family. As a society, that means individually, when you see parents having difficulties with their children, you have a duty to help. You know, in the old days, I asked some questions at the end of a policy presentation I did at UB. And they were simply, do we now today, if you see a child misbehaving, do you tell his or her parent? We used to do that. If you see a child going wrong, do you seek to intervene and set them on the right track? We used to do that. If you see a child misbehaving because of neglect by parents, do you seek to help the parent? We used to do that. Are you a member of any group that assists children or families? And if you don't have the time to be a member of a group, do you support any group that does that? You know, we often hear people talk about where is the church? Well, everyone who says that, my saying now is, you must be a heathen because the church are the people, not the building. And so if you are a Christian, you are the church. And so you shouldn't be asking, where is the church? You should be asking, what am I doing? Yes. And so this is very clear, recognized by the United Nations, and we need to get serious about protecting the family as individuals and as the state. There are a number of programs that have been rolled out that does just that. Article 17 provides everyone has the right to his own property, alone as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his property. That is very important and recognized. Article 18 provides everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes the freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. It is very important that I respect as a Christian the right of Muslims, of anybody else, even the right of heathens. That is their choice, and that must be respected. Article 19 provides everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. The freedom of opinion and expression, however, is subject to the earlier freedom of persons not to be attacked upon their honor and reputation unduly. In this age, people seem to focus on Article 18 and completely forget Article 12. You do not have an unfettered right to say what you like, whenever you like, regardless of what it is that you say. Article 20 provides everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And 2, no one may be compelled to belong to an association. That is basically the right to be associated with people and to disassociate yourself from people. Article 21 in 3 parts provide everyone has a right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. 2, everyone has the right to equal access to public service in his country. And 3, the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or equivalent free voting procedures. Again, in this place, we celebrated the suffrage of women, which happened very recently. So until very recently, we would not have been in compliance with Article 21. There was a time when there was the property vote. And so there was a number of impediments that were removed that eventually led to majority rule and eventually brought us in compliance with Article 21. Article 22 provides everyone as a member of society has the right to social security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the full development of his personality. We on this side have, through the history of this party, sought to make the wealth more common and have sought to realize the vision of Article 22. Article 23 provides that everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. 2, everyone without any discrimination has the right to equal pay for equal work. 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented if necessary by other means of social protection. And 4, everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of their interests. It is noteworthy that in this term, this Davis Cooper administration has moved the minimum wage up. And it is just that. And as the member for Carmichael has said, that is a first step because Article 23 recognizes that you must be able to earn so that you could live yourself and your family a life worthy of human dignity. It is a commitment that we take seriously, and it is a commitment that drives us day in and day out. Article 24 provides everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. That is your right. You cannot be worked into the ground continuously. Some of us, and I'm not only talking to the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, choose not to avail ourselves of this right. Choose to work around the clock, choose to work without holidays, but this recognizes that leisure time is important, and you have that right. Of course, it is a matter that you may choose to avail yourself of a right or choose not to. Article 25 provides everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. 2, motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in and out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection. It recognizes the importance of women and children. It is a mark to aim for, that the standard of living must be adequate for all of these purposes. Are we hitting all of these marks in this country today? Unless we want to be delusional, we would admit that we are not. We must be honest with ourselves and the people and admit it is something that we are striving for. As I say, we took the first step early by raising the minimum age. We continue to take steps. The Minister of Social Services announced an increase in the social protection. And so we are continually working towards these goals. Article 26, and just to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this committee will be able to examine how close we are to this standard and to advise on a regular basis this Parliament as to what we can do to move ourselves closer to full compliance. Article 26 provides everyone has the right to education. Education shall be, and I know the member for Angliston likes this one. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Sub-Article 2, education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. Angliston has been saying that every time she speaks. And to strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Sub-Article 3, parents have a right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. Article 27 provides everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy their arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Sub-Article 2, everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. And this is a matter that Fort Charlotte is passionate about, protecting the intellectual property rights of our talented Bahamians. And he often decries our talented musicians, whose intellectual property rights have not been fully protected. And it is a matter that we must pay attention to. Article 28 provides everyone is entitled to social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forward in this declaration can be fully realized. This imposes upon us the need to create this social order, but more importantly, This imposes on the international community the need to take steps to ensure that these articles are realized. Recently, you've heard the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador call on our neighbor to the north to put in place steps so that young Bahamian men can enjoy the right to life, not to be affected by firearms illegally trafficked from that country. Article 28 imposes on our neighbor to the north the United States of America to positively answer the call put out by our Honorable Prime Minister. And you know, it's a small thing, and we've heard some commentary about why is he doing this. Well, he would be doing it because he has full realization that they have certain obligations to us. And the Bible often says, you have not because you ask not. Well, he has asked, he continues to ask, and he will continue to ask until there is some result. Article 29 provides everyone has a duty to community in which alone the free and full development of his personality is possible. That creates a duty on us to give to the community in which we are developing assistance and aid. Subarticle 2 provides in the exercise of his rights and freedom, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare of democratic society. That provides that you do not have unfettered rights to damage other people and to damage your society. Subarticle 3 provides these rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purpose and principles of the United Nations. So they are not in a vacuum. They have a context, and that context is important. The final Article 30 provides nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. That conditions everything. You can't go around lambasting persons' honor and character because you say you have free speech. It is very clear. You cannot go around wherever you like if it affects the security of other persons. We do not live in a hedonistic society. We live in a cooperative society, and everyone must cooperate so that we may all live a peaceable life. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is perhaps the most I read from in any debate that I have been involved with, but I thought it was important that we see what the words are. So often people propose to tell us what our rights are, and as a constitutional lawyer, it is sometimes distressing to hear what they say these rights are. The Bahamian people would have now heard them read. They're available on the United Nations website. And an interesting exercise I would invite all of you to do if you are minded is to, after you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, look at our Constitution. It is there. It is written in plain language. Again, we on this side believe that lay people can very easily read and engage the law. And so I invite you to have a look at it. Don't take it from other people, read it for yourself. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is because the Universal Declaration of Human Rights protects the constituents in Freetown as much as they protect me, that on behalf of Freetown, it is my honor to move this resolution.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think the hallmark of any democratic society is the acceptance of universal rights, normally called human rights, of that democratic society. And as a member of the United Nations, we are obligated to several treaties and arrangements that bind us as a community of nations. And the idea of the United Nations, though, was set up to attempt to, as it were, have what I call uniform rights, and acknowledging in some instances that there'll be what a Privy Council judge once described as cultural relativity, which distinguishes the experiences of any particular nation and or community that would inform their relationship between each other as a people. But at the same time, to acknowledge that there are just some rights that even cultural relativity concept ought not to displace. Like, for example, the right to live, and the right to not be engaged in forced labors or slavery. Those are rights that have bubbled up to been accepted as what they call universal rights that ought not to be impacted by cultural relativity. Because in some societies, for example, we know that child labor is seen to be as a norm unacceptable. But that's the culture of that society, but that is not a universally accepted position. And so it is so propitious that today we seek to pass this resolution for the establishment of a committee, and I call it a parliamentary committee, to be made up of members of this House and Senate, to assess and evaluate matters related to the protection and the enforcement of human rights in this country, and to make reports at least twice a year on any findings that they may have, to see how we are adhering to, observing these rights. And it is, first of all, it talks about the protection of human rights. So I ought to be protected, for example, from slander and defamatory accusations, just as you ought to be protected from those things. But then the idea is how do we enforce
ought to be then the next pillar is the enforcement of those rights. And of course, when you talk about defamation, you sue for you go into courts. But then again, is that an effective mechanism recognizing the state of the administration of justice? And again, there's no issue as to where we are today in that. I mean, it's a question of how lawyers conduct themselves as practitioners, how judges have control of their courts, how all of the other stakeholders who are part of the system work effectively. We could set up the best system to protect and to enforce. But if the persons that are the personnel that have to protect, have to enforce, do not do their job, we're still not enforcing or protecting. But today, I am heartened. Earlier, I would have given a communication, and I'll give it in this debate. And late, when I'm finished, because one of the rights that, and I want to thank the member for Freetown for laying out all the rights and speaking to some of them. And when he spoke, I think it's Article 21, that spoke to the right to take part in the government of his country. Everyone having the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through a chosen representative, meaning they have the right to decide who should represent any particular constituency, district, island, whatever nomenclature you want to call that grouping of persons who are to elect or choose the one person. And that right also speaks to the will of the people. And that should be the basis of the authority of the government. And so in this instance, the will of the people was expressed September 16, 2021, right? But that expression of the will is to be determined by what we call, what the provisions of Article 21 speaks to, genuine elections. And again, genuine elections. So an election could be called into question as not being genuine if, for example, you have a population of 200 persons living on one island, and they could vote for 2 representatives. And then you have another block of people where you have 2,000 persons, and they can only vote for 1 representative. Right. And so, and that concept of it not being genuine, sometimes they call it gerrymandering of the constituency. So you give me 5,000 people to vote for me to elect their representatives, and then you give 200 persons the right to vote for 1 person as well. That cannot be what is called the will of the people. And so, exactly, so we heard about Black Tuesday, right? And this is talking about, again, our universal rights. 58 years ago, tomorrow, would have been Black Tuesday. So, leader, you're a good man. You choose such a day like this for us to speak about human rights and to establish, which we were obliged to be just now doing, set a parliamentary committee to evaluate what's happening in our country as it relates to human rights. And today you should have laid the ombudsman bill, which also is another tool for the electorate to be able to complain and to bring to the authorities' attention issues that could relate as well to human rights. So I take this opportunity today to recall and ask for the commemoration of the 58th anniversary of Black Tuesday. Which was a pivotal moment in our nation's history that has shaped our collective identity and continues to inspire us in times of challenge today. Continues to inspire us in times of challenge and adversity. You know, this is something that we all benefited from. You who sit opposite to us, you may not have been here today had not been for this act, right, 58 years ago, on the 27th of April, 1965, when the late Sir Lyndon Pindling, then the leader of the opposition and later Prime Minister, demonstrated extraordinary courage by throwing the Speaker's mace out of the House of Assembly, east window, right over there. This act of defiance in protest of the gerrymandering, I said gerrymandering of electoral boundaries by the then governing United Bahamian Party, became a symbol of our people's unwavering determination to fight for fairness and equal representation. Yeah. You know, so when you all fight for fairness and equal representation, that's your right to do. But always remember, let that act of defiance by the late Sir Lyndon Pindling inspire you to appreciate that it has to start somewhere. Madam Speaker, sorry, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know, as a young Bahamian, growing up in the aftermath of Black Tuesday, I was inspired by the stories of Sir Lyndon Pindling, Sir Milo Butler Sr., and others who risked their lives, livelihoods, and reputations to ensure that future generations would inherit a more just and equal society. Their courage, their dedication to the cause of democracy have left an indelible mark on my own life, shaping my values and guiding my actions as a public servant. And I commend to you to allow that act to likewise shape your value, your actions as a public servant. In times like these, when our nation faces unprecedented challenges, from a pandemic to the global inflation crisis, to the urgent need to address climate change and its devastating impacts on our islands, the legacy of Black Tuesday serves as a powerful reminder of the strength and resilience of us as a people. We have weathered many storms throughout our history, and we've always emerged stronger and more united. Today, as we confront new and daunting challenges, we must draw strength from the lessons of Black Tuesday and reaffirm our commitment to the democratic principles and values that have sustained us throughout our journey as a nation. Madam Deputy Speaker, Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as, as Prime Minister, I am deeply humbled and honored to carry on the legacy of those who came before me. And I pledge to do everything in my power to ensure that the dreams and aspirations of every Bahamian are given the opportunity to flourish. And I borrow the words of the Honorable A.D. Hanna, whose mantra was, let us not rest until we have wiped every tear from every eye. I'm committed to working tirelessly to build a brighter future for our nation, a future grounded in the principles of fairness, equality, and justice that was so eloquently championed by Sir Lyndon Pindling and A.D. Hanna and their fellow freedom fighters. In times of uncertainty and change, the spirit of Black Tuesday serves as a beacon of hope and inspiration for us all. It reminds us that together we can overcome adversity and build a better, more inclusive society for ourselves and future generations. So let us honor the sacrifices of our forebears by reaffirming our commitment to the democratic principles they fought so hard to establish. Let us remember the courage and conviction of those who came before and draw strength from their example. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Black Tuesday, let us carry the torch of democracy forward, united in our determination to create a brighter, more equitable future for all Bahamians. On this momentous occasion, I call on all Bahamians to take the lessons of Black Tuesday to heart and to embrace the spirit of unity and determination that has defined our nation for generations. Together, let us write the next chapter in our nation's history, a chapter that is filled with hope, progress, and the unwavering belief that the best days of our beloved Bahamas are still ahead of us. I want to thank you for that, and may God continue to bless our Bahamas. And what, as I said, it is so, it's providential that on this day, that members of Parliament will be unanimously accepting that we appoint a committee to evaluate and assess those rights that were born out of that act on Black Tuesday, to ensure that act was to ensure that elections were genuine. But out of that came all of these other universal rights. And the time has come for us to continue to monitor and assess where we are and how we are performing in respect to that aspect. Madam, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, would you like to table that?
I'd like to lay the
Order that the documents be brought up.
okay.
Order that the documents to lie on the table. It has been moved and seconded that the resolution be agreed. Whereas that the following resolution be agreed. Yeah. Whereas the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is a member of the United Nations that seeks to promote uniformity in the implementation, protection, and enforcement of human rights. Be it further resolved that the terms of reference of the committee as follows: to assess and evaluate all matters related to the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas, to determine the level at which such rights are in compliance with regional and global obligations, to report to Parliament every 6 months on human rights matters, to make recommendations to guide the legislative process to improve human rights in the Bahamas, to investigate alleged human rights violations through parliamentary inquiries, holding public hearings on human rights related issues, with power to send for persons and papers, which leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise today on the 26th of April, 2023, in this honorable House on behalf of the great constituents of St. Anne's and the wider people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is time well spent in the House today. I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues on the opposition side representing the Free National Movement under leader Michael Pintard, as well as government, PLP, members of Parliament for different constituencies, led by the Honorable Prime Minister, Representative for Cat Island, Rum Cay, and San Salvador, Philip Edward Brave Davis. Mr. Deputy Speaker, today we have an opportunity to participate in what is fundamentally the most important aspect of human society. That is the recognition and protection of our human rights. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the idea of human rights is that each one of us, no matter where we are born, is entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms. In 1215 AD, the Magna Carta was signed by King John. I have a copy of it here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not laying it before the table. Originally written in Latin, and if you're an attorney, it's one of the first principles of law that you get introduced to when you're studying. 1215 AD. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was the first document Mr. Deputy Speaker, it was the first document to put into writing the principle that the king and his government was not above the law. Mr. Deputy Speaker, later in the recognition of human rights, the U.S. Declaration of Independence in 1776 acknowledged that every human being has the right to life, liberty, security of his person. Also, all persons are equal before the laws and have the rights and duties established without distinction as to race, sex, language, creed, or other factor.
You have slavery, right? Exactly. You have slavery, exactly. On that damn deter you. Slavery. She didn't apply to that. Slavery.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the aftermath of World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust, a group led by Eleanor Roosevelt, after 2 years of meetings, came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This was something that after 2 years was approved by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris in 1948. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my good colleague from Freetown has already gone through a number of the articles of the Declaration of Human Rights. But just in case nobody was listening to him at the time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am going to read some of those articles now. All human beings are born free. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in the spirit of brotherhood. A key fundamental human right, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that all men are equal, and as the Bible teaches us, we should do unto others as we have them do unto ourselves. By Article 2, everyone is entitled to all of the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration of Human Rights, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on this basis of political, jurisdictional, and international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or under any other limitation of sovereignty. And the third article, which is a fundamental right that you'll find time and time again, is that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. As the good member from Fort Charlotte was saying a moment ago on the same topic by Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. And by Article 5, Mr. Deputy Speaker, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in all, there are 30 articles under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that were passed by unanimous decision by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as we continue on the journey of human rights, and if I can, I'll just go back, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because I've brought a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that came into force in January of 1963. This was done and signed by US President Abraham Lincoln, and it came into effect on the 1st of January, 1863. And it reads, of importance to my contribution here today, that on the first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as enslaved within the state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforward and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in their efforts they may make for their actual freedom. Mr. Deputy Speaker, human rights have a complicated history, but those that are alive now have a general expectation that what is in our history is not the way we want our future to be. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 1973, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in 1973, under our Constitution, Chapter 3, Article 15, subheaded Protection of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms of the Individual. Article 15, whereas every person in the Bahamas is entitled to a fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, that is to say, has the right, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinions, color, creed, or sex, but subject to the rights and freedoms of others, and for the public interest, to each and all of the following, namely, A, life, liberty, security of the person, and the protection of the law. B, freedom of conscience, of expression, and of assembly and association. And C, protection for the privacy of his home and other property, and from deprivation of property without compensation. It goes on, most importantly, the member from Freetown touched on this, and it's a distinction that we all must understand, not only in our Commonwealth, but throughout the world. It goes on to say, the subsequent provisions of this chapter shall have effect for the purpose of affording protection to the aforesaid rights and freedoms subject to such limitations of that protection as are contained in those provisions, being limitations designed to ensure that the enjoyment of said rights and freedoms by any individual does not prejudice the rights and freedoms of others or the public interest. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we look at the UN Declaration on Human Rights, when we look at the commandments of our Bible, when we look at the US Declarations of Independence provisions on human rights, we look at the US Emancipation Proclamation and our Constitution, we have to pay attention to it all and examine, especially for the purposes of this committee, how it relates to our local issues. A key fundamental United Nations Declaration of Human Rights principle is that all human beings are born free and equal. It recognizes the principle of non-discrimination. Does our Constitution discriminate against our women? Will this committee, if appointed, be able to conclude that we are not in breach of the UN Declaration on Human Rights because our Constitution does not clearly state women may pass on citizenship to their children? The UN Declaration on Human Rights, Mr. Deputy Speaker, also refers to negative freedoms, the freedom from torture. We often hear claims of beatings by persons that have been in police custody. Claims is all that I've said. Will this committee be able to conclude that we are not in breach of the UN Declaration of Human Rights because of what some members of the public view as inadequate investigations into claims of police brutality when such offenses are found to occur, that there is inadequate repercussions? Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UN Declaration of Human Rights also recognizes the freedom of movement. Not long ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think it was just earlier this year, Human Rights Bahamas gave a press statement in relation to the case of a Kenyan man detained for more than 6 years by the name of Gumi. The press statement reads that Human Rights Bahamas the statement reads, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that Human Rights Bahamas welcomes this landmark Privy Council ruling, which has clarified once and for all that the current detention practices of the Bahamas Immigration Department are illegal. The ruling affirms that Human Rights Bahamas has stated repeatedly, the authorities have no lawful right to detain a person suspected of violating the Immigration Act for more than 48 hours at absolute maximum. They must either bring such individuals before the courts or release them immediately or deport them. Further, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it confirms that even after a person pleads guilty and is convicted of violating the act and a recommendation of deportation is made by the courts, the authorities cannot continue to hold that individual for more than 2 working days in the absence of a signed deportation order. Human rights defenders, both at home and abroad, have repeatedly condemned the excesses and unlawful actions of the Immigration Department, which regularly deprive individuals of their constitutionally protected liberty for weeks, months, and even years at a time, subjecting them to cruel beatings, torture, and appalling conditions in the meantime. This ruling, Madam Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, draws a line in the sand. The status quo cannot be allowed to continue. And it concludes, Human Rights Bahamas calls for an immediate, transparent, and complete review and overhaul of the protocols and policies governing immigration enforcement with the aim of finally bringing the activities of the department in line with national law, international best practices, and universal standards of common decency. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are instances of personal freedoms being deprived from the innocent throughout the world. When I first got involved with my pursuit in continuing a legal education, it was aspects of miscarriages of justice, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that intrigued me the most. Cases like the Guilford Four, cases you would hear out of the United States of America, where above all else, justice must be seen to be done and the innocent must be free. In addition to Mr. Gumi, you have other cases in our history where persons were seen to have been illegally detained, and it cost the public treasury significant sums over time because awards for their unlawful detention were granted to them. Some of the individuals include Joseph Amiri, held illegally for 7 years. Attain Takitota, 8 years. Matthew Sewell, nearly a decade. Mr. Deputy Speaker, issues of human rights violations are real in our Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The Declaration takes no sides on which rights are more important to other rights. And we must remember as a nation, as we sit on our couches in our offices today watching Channel 420, the Parliamentary channel, or listening at our desks to the radio, that at the end of the day, the UN Declaration of Human Rights is a declaration and not a hard universal law. To monitor the applications of such rights around the world, the function of this proposed committee at the legislative level shall play a critical role for the realization of human rights at a national level, to then facilitate the government's compliance with those human rights obligations on regional and international levels. Mr. Deputy, I now intend to conclude my contribution. It's unfortunate that the member from Freetown is not here at this moment, but it's possible that the good member from Fort Charlotte can put his KC legal eye on the drafting of this resolution, because I believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there is a conflict between the fourth recital and the first resolution. And I've tried to raise this already, and some members, excuse me, Mr. Deputy, if I can conclude now.
Yeah.
The member knows he's correct and he would like to conclude,
you,
Mr.
Honourable
Deputy
Member.
Speaker. I don't need any member from that side standing up and repeating what I know. You have your opportunity to speak, you do so when it's your time. There is a conflict, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in my view.
Order, members.
There is a conflict, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the fourth recital and the first resolution. And it's a simple correction that can be made at committee level, but if I can, I'll bring it to your attention now. The fourth recital reads, "And whereas Parliament is desirous of constituting a committee to comprise of 8 members of Parliament, bracket, 5 members of the House of Assembly and 3 members of the Senate, close bracket, to be responsible for monitoring the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas." And then the first resolution in conflict reads, "Now therefore be it resolved that this House approves the constitution of a committee of 5 members of Parliament to monitor the protection and enforcement of human rights in the Bahamas." Mr. Deputy Speaker, I propose that the first recital be amended so that it reads, "The House approves the constitution of a committee of 8 members of Parliament." And Mr. Deputy Speaker, with that said, I'd like the public to know that I support the appointment of this committee. And like each and every one of my fellow colleagues on the opposition side, I hope to be one of the few privileged to serve and bring attention to the important issues of various aspects of human rights in our Commonwealth. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
This member had no intention of disrupting St. Anne's at his most spectacular statement that he wanted to make. The reality is, Mr. Deputy, that we have recognized that there is error, and that will be corrected at the committee stage.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Golden Gate.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. To God be the glory for the opportunity to stand here in this honorable place and to represent the wonderful, fine people of Golden Gates. It's obviously a privilege to serve on their behalf. I see one of our awesome stalwarts in the gallery, Mr. Edley Sargent, and all the stalwarts that are always watching, Miss Iris Hudson, Miss Jackie Dean, Miss Doris Barry, Miss Marjorie Roll. Lord, I shouldn't start because there's so many of them. But I'm happy to serve the great, great people of the Gates, Golden Gates. I am also privileged to serve and lead 23,000 public servants across our country at the pleasure of our Prime Minister. And he's ours. But I would like to wish happy Administrative Professionals Day to all the administrative professionals across the archipelago in the public service who are doing a fine job, and of course to administrative professionals across our country. I would like to make sure that I extend condolences publicly to the families of bereaved families in Golden Gates. That's the families of Ted Larimore, Deara Edgecombe, of course, to Ms. Frankie May Mather's family, Ann Thompson, and Ekron Pratt. I would like to extend condolences to our DPM again on the passing of his brother, and to my bishop and my church family at Mount Tabor, Pastor Delton, the entire Ellis family, who is my Bimini family, on the passing of Elder Clarence Ellis. May all of the souls of the dearly departed rest in God's perfect peace. So, Deputy, as I traverse our nation, a lot of young people take the time to speak to me from both sides, and some who are not even politically connected. And they are inspired. I'm glad to be counted in the young people, by the way, but they're inspired by our new generation of leaders, especially in our administration, that are representative of their generation. And so it inspires me when I know that they are listening. And so because they are listening, I always make sure that I am able to give a historical perspective, because I stand on the principle that to know where you are going or to understand where your future is, you must understand your past. So I will follow the member of Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador in commemoration of the eve of our 58th anniversary of Black Tuesday protest, and give a historical perspective in commemoration of that day. In 1962, the PLP was convinced that it had all the ingredients to win the majority. It had finally secured the vote for women, and so it was expected that with this, the revision of boundaries in 1960, majority rule could have been accomplished. The defeat in 1962 was a bitter blow for the people's movement. That was because the number of seats in New Providence were outnumbered by the seats in the Family Islands, even though the population of New Providence outnumbered the population of the islands. So it was determined that a more aggressive measure would be required to make the point. Thus, it was decided by the PLP's council that there should be something done when the House met on the 27th of April, 1965. The men were advised by the lone female voice, Miss Effie Walks, that there was time for radical action. Yes. The occasion was a debate over the revision on boundaries of constituencies for the next general election, and the PLP took the position that the commission should take into account not just all registered voters, but all potential voters eligible to vote. The UBP refused. As the debate dragged on, with the crowd shouting, "Amend, amend," from this same public square, a young Lyndon Pindling grabbed the speaker's mace and threw it through the eastern window. Milo Butler threw the speaker's hourglass after it. They then exited the House and marched their followers to the historic Southern Recreation Grounds. Lyndon Pindling said when they planned the action, they were conscious of how the riot in 1942 got started, and they did not want a repeat of that event, so the idea was a peaceful protest. That protest led and set the stage for majority rule on the 10th of January, 1967. So we continue on this day to thank all those who helped to fight for our freedom, who now are all blessed memories. Sir Lyndon Oscar Pindling, Sir Milo Butler, Effie Walks, Sir Arthur Hanna, Ena Hepburn, Sir Cecil Wallace Whitfield, and Sir Arthur Folkes are some of the names we remember and we recall. There are many others, but mainly the Bahamians of ordinary estate who came out to support the progressive cause and go down in our history perhaps unnamed, but heroes and heroines none the same. Mr. Deputy, it is a privilege in commemoration on the eve of Black Tuesday to rise today in support of a resolution for the establishment of a parliamentary committee responsible for the monitoring, protection, and enforcement of human rights. In establishing this committee, we will have a representative-led body examining all areas related to the protection and enforcement of human rights, especially within the context of our regional and global obligations as a member of CARICOM, the United Nations, and a number of other international organizations. Mr. Deputy, I look forward to the work that will be done to promote human rights, change related policies and laws, investigate human rights infringements, and generally ensure that human rights are a priority for this Parliament and for this nation. I am grateful to live in the Bahamas, a nation where human rights are largely protected and respected. Now, this is not to say that there aren't areas where we have a lot of work to do, Mr. Deputy. The national dialogue we're having on the rights of migrants, the rights of women, stand out as major areas of concern. But there's also defamation of character and personal attacks via social media and other forms of medium that are among several other areas that international agencies have identified and are considered as needing improvement. The fact that we are able to have conversations about these critical areas where all sides of the discussion are heard is a testament to our inherent respect for one another. In representing our nation at the United Nations recently, I was able to engage in discussions with officials whose countries have not yet taken many of the steps that we have already taken. And I've also privileged to hear from countries who have gone a step further than us, taking as a measuring tool for where we are as a nation when it comes to human rights. The UN experience indicates where we are strong as a nation and where we have work to be done. Mr. Deputy, we have some very critical national conversations that the government must take the lead on in the near future. While these conversations take place, we must ensure that we're making progress on advancing our human rights agenda in a timely manner. This committee will work toward making real progress on human rights issues, and that real progress will be measured by the impact on people's lives. Impactful change is often an exercise in balance. Our human rights framework will be informed by international best practices, but it should also consider the local context. We are a people with a unique culture, beliefs, values, religious practices, and identities. Our national obligation to adhere to human rights conventions must also include a duty to the Bahamian people to hear and incorporate their views and ensure that our decisions do not contradict Bahamian values, morals, and godly principles. Effective stakeholder engagement is essential, especially when new ideas and concepts are being considered. Of course, that is not a new idea. Working along with stakeholders is an essential part of the policymaking process, but especially when it comes to human rights, it is so important that people's voices are heard and respected. And that respect should apply to a diverse range of views, as long as those views do not advocate for harming people or infringing on the essential human rights and dignity of others. Mr. Deputy, the reason this committee is so needed is because of how complex and comprehensive the process of enacting new laws and policies can be in any context. But for human rights, there are a number of legal, cultural, and social elements to navigate. There are issues regarding tensions between international and local beliefs. There are issues regarding practicality and capacity. There are context-specific issues that make a solution that works elsewhere not work within our country. and there are so many relevant sub-issues that must be explored. All of this work must be done in a thorough manner so that the problems at hand are solved and new unintentional problems aren't created. But where human rights are being violated, there's also a need for urgency. This work must be comprehensive yet quick. I believe this committee will be a driving force to assist with achieving the dual objectives of speed and comprehensiveness. We look to any human rights issue to see how complex these issues can get. When it comes to marital rape, for instance, there are the moral and ethical concerns and the need to protect women from harm. Then there's the range of views, even within the religious community, that are diverse views. Regardless of where our views fall on this matter and how urgently we want to see action, engagement of all stakeholders is a necessary step that cannot be skipped because the tenets of good policy making demand that it is done. There's also the international standard and perspective, which we are obligated to make strides toward. And then there's the issue of how we fully protect victims, and if and when such a law is passed. Reparations, for example, are a major consideration. In a scenario in which a sole breadwinner is arrested, what happens to the mother and children? Surely they have the ability to seek justice and compensation for pain and damages caused in the criminal and civic courts, but is there a duty of care as well? If our goal is to meaningfully remedy the situation, we must have systems in place to respond to the financial and social well-being of these families. Then there is the likely need for mental health support. These are systems that admittedly need more investment, even now. In going about our legislative and policy-making duties, there's a certain connectedness and cohesion that is needed across government systems if we are to achieve real progress. And once again, when I say real progress, I'm referring to the actual impact on the lives of people. That is progress that really matters. Mr. Deputy, it should be noted that in being so comprehensive in our exploration of these issues, there's often not one clear or right answer. Instead, there are a range of choices and compromises that must be made. In the case of urgent matters or issues like marital rape, there's no need to wait until we figure every last aspect of every sub-issue out to begin taking action to protect women. Some actions must be taken in stages. We can take the first critical steps and figure out the other policies along the way. When an issue is urgent enough, that is often necessary. So there's not only a need to be quick and comprehensive, there's a need to be decisive and practical. It is generally recognized that what is good for women is good for everyone. Societies that are proactive when it comes to women's rights tend to be generally more progressive and prosperous. Empowered women create better countries. But even as we protect and empower our women and girls, we cannot leave out our men and boys. There are many rights issues to be addressed within the male population as well. Within the international context, there's even talk about parliamentarian rights. Yes, parliamentarian rights is a thing. And then there is the intersection of issues that require specific attention. For example, women parliamentarians sit at the intersection of women's rights as well as parliamentarians' rights. As Minister of State for the Public Service, I'm very involved with diversity and inclusion initiatives with special attention paid to accessible buildings and public spaces, removing barriers to accessing services, and creating opportunities for those who are differently abled. There are many human rights and human empowerment issues for that population, and it must be considered in such an adaptive way because there are so many ways that people's lives are impacted by disabilities. Mr. Deputy, I'm mentioning the diverse and complex issues involved in human rights work to make it clear that this work is hardly ever straightforward and never easy. Even as international organizations pressure us to take certain actions on migrants, for example, we must ensure that the way we go about delivering on our commitments are also in line with what is going on within the local landscape. Our decisions must be sound, and there's no shortcut around doing the hard work. We must look at other countries within the world and the region with demographics and contexts similar to ours. We must also look at certain amendments and how they affect the Constitution and whether referenda are necessary. Does the necessity of a referendum make such changes likely to occur? Or are these adjustments that we can make for the sake of practicality that will make the change more likely, even if it isn't exactly what the advocates want to see? It's a lot of work, Mr. Deputy, and I'm proud to be a part of an administration that has prioritized human rights and is putting this parliamentary committee in place to hold us all accountable and ensure that progress is made on human rights commitments. The work that will be done by this committee is absolutely needed. I believe that this will be a healthy, bipartisan effort geared toward progressive change that I look forward to supporting in any way that I can. Thank you, Mr. Deputy, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Barnabas.
Oh, okay. I couldn't misunderstood. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Sorry? My good friend from Pinewood. Mr. Deputy, I rise on behalf of the good people of the constituency of St. Barnabas. Grateful to Almighty God to live, as I always say, in the greatest country in the world, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Grateful for another opportunity to try to be a better husband, a better father, a better citizen of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to stand to contribute in this debate. Before I get into, thank you. Before I get into a few matters relating to this resolution, I just wish Mr. Deputy to highlight a few things. Mr. Deputy, a few weekends ago, our Carifta teams, swimming and track and field, would have shown the region and the world how we continue to mark the manner of our bearing, and would have put in incredible performance both in swimming and track and field, and combined in that week would have succeeded in securing 126 medals among CARICOM countries. And our team should be celebrated for that and commended for how they continue to make us proud. Also, Mr. Deputy, as we debate this resolution, I'm minded of the fact that these issues as it relates to human rights, we have been on a parallel journey, if you will, Mr. Deputy, as we perfect the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in our 50th year. We've been running a parallel journey to enhance the protections and enforcement of human rights. And all of the members that have spoken already would have given valuable contributions diverse but valuable contributions on the magnitude, the necessity, and the significance of what we are here to do today. Mr. Deputy, one of the aspects of human rights, and the member from Freetown talked about it, and it was sown through the various contributions so far, is the right in terms of security of persons. And so as we deliberate here today, I would humbly submit to all of us to definitely not look at this in any kind of isolation, but in the broad aspect of 50 years of independence, who we've been as a country, and where it is that we seek to go in the next 50 years and beyond, as we continue to craft the contours of what we hear from the Bahamian people, who we want to be. Because the truth is, as we talk about human rights and the various issues that emanate from the whole discussion of human rights, and that may even emanate from this discussion today, it will give us the opportunity to deal with a number of issues, issues of sovereignty, and those, quite frankly, oftentimes possible irreconcilable tensions that may exist between sovereignty and human rights. Mr. Deputy, I recalled, for example, in 2001, the Australian government, just to highlight this aspect of the tension between sovereignty and human rights. The Australian government had what they called a processing center on a separate island to process asylum seekers and so forth. And the government contended that it was their sovereign right to protect its borders and how that processing should occur. But there were those who felt that the way in which the Australian government was doing it was violating the human rights of those asylum seekers. So we know in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas the challenges that we have with illegal immigration and what the Bahamian people and we as a government, regardless of party, our views on the illegal immigration issue in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that we've been dealing with for decades, and the natural tension that exists with what we desire for ourselves, what we desire in the form of self-determination, and what global bodies may feel the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the Bahamas government, irrespective of party, should be doing. And so that is an example, and that's a real issue and a live issue, as we know that we have all been contending with. So as we think about this necessary resolution and this select committee, being mindful that there is going to be a number of issues, discussions, justifiably so, that will emanate from this resolution. I believe that the Bahamian people, as they watch us here today, they don't hear necessarily the bantering and the jostling that happens in here. And that's not necessarily a bad thing that's happened over decades. This is a body of debating and making your points. But I do think today there's a solemnity that has placed itself in the body of this parliament here this morning, as it should be, because the magnitude of the issues that impact the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as it relates to human rights and the discussions that will ensue from what we do here today, quite frankly, issues that we may have avoided for different reasons, be it political, be it that just not wanting to have that discussion at that time. There is no doubt in the Bahamian people's eyes that those discussions will come, will come. And this body and other bodies will be called upon to make decisions that impact the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the Bahamian people in a real significant way. And this, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Mr. Deputy, this issue of oftentimes irreconcilable tensions between human rights and state sovereignty, is something that I believe that when this committee is formed, they will begin to deal with, front and center. Because as we all know, the issue of state sovereignty, resident in that is the beliefs, the values, the culture of a people, and how that is applied and how that is executed in our sovereign standing. And so the natural tensions that will exist about who we want to be, who we ought to be as a people, and some of the, again, tensions, to use that word, tensions that will exist, and how we litigate that, how we ventilate some of these issues, because at the end of the day, for example, there will be discussions with the Bahamian people, and we will hear from the Bahamian people as it relates to these issues that the committee will deal with. And we will hear from the Bahamian people through possibly referendums and elections. And it is our duty to hear what the Bahamian people have to say and to reconcile what may be expected of us from a global standpoint and what the Bahamian people decide that they want, Bahamian people decide what they want for themselves. Mr. Deputy, as I look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the good member from Freetown would have started off with, and a number of other members would have pointed out, no doubt as you read through the articles, it essentially reminds us that all of these articles and the human rights that they give a view on and that they articulate continues to be things that we deal with on a daily basis here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in terms of how do we enhance protections, how do we enhance enforcements of individual rights, human rights in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And just on this note, Mr. Deputy, and I am going to try my best, and I will attempt very aggressively to strip away all politics from my body right now to make a statement on a particular issue that is in the framework of human rights. And I will try my best, and hopefully my colleagues on the other side would see the purity of my intent, Mr. Deputy. And that is, as we talk about, security of person and the right of any person not to experience, any violence. But I'm talking specifically about the state of crime in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And let me just say this, and I wish the Prime Minister were here, the member for Cat Island, Rum Kingston, Salvador, but I'm sure he will hear this. We have a problem here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas as it relates to crime. This is not a moment about blaming the National Security Minister. And I may even take some blows for that from supporters of my party who feel that rough the minister up. But I stand here as a Bahamian, and we have to accept that the state of crime in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is at an unacceptable level. And it has been at an unacceptable level through past administrations. So let's get that out of the way. This isn't a PLP problem or F&M problem. And so when I say I wish the Prime Minister was here, because I would want to say to the Prime Minister, to appeal to the Prime Minister, to let us come together. Let us come together as legislators, as a country, law enforcement, civic society, civil leaders, civic society, church-based organizations. Let us come together. We've just had 10 murders in 12 days. As we sit here today, that cannot be acceptable to any of us. It cannot be acceptable to the Bahamian people that that is something that should be all right. Whether that was during a Progressive Liberal Party administration or a Free National Movement administration. We are not helpless to deal with the issue of crime in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We are not. We are not. We are courageous, intelligent people. I always say the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is an incubator of purpose and talent. We are not helpless, but we must come together. We must come together and deal with this issue in a real way. This can't be the Commonwealth of the Bahamas where daily, like I said, 10 murders in 12 days. And yes, the easy political thing to do would be to blame the member for Freetown. You know, that would be the easy thing to do. But I say very, very sincerely. I say very sincerely. No, I've never blamed the member for Freetown. I believe I've said, and we have said, the opposition has just said that we feel that the government should lead in bringing us together, and I still stand by that. But I would never suggest that the problem of people being murdered put at the feet of the member of Freetown or the government. My parents wouldn't be proud of that. I don't even think my children would be proud of me to make such a statement. We've just asked the government to lead, to bring us all together to deal with this issue. So, Mr. Deputy, I just thought it was just very, very important to say that today, because again, this, we all can agree, is totally unacceptable, and we cannot continue to come in this house every Wednesday, or whichever day we come in here, and as these numbers climb and the situation gets worse, and we don't try to make a significant progress on this issue. Mr. Deputy, and I will add to that, that in this 50th year of independence, and even as we debate this resolution, let us not fall into the trap of just saying that this is an isolated debate for a stretch of time or a series of weeks and months. But let what we're doing in here today inform the direction that we want to put the Commonwealth of the Bahamas on in the next 50 years, and beyond. I think about it every day, Mr. Deputy. And I'm fortunate now to I've spent 46 years on this earth, and you know, that may be 46 years old now may be considered midlife. Who knows if God will grant me another 46 years. So daily I think about, like many of you, I think about my mortality. And, you know, I say to myself, what kind of country do I want to leave for my grandkids, for my great-grandkids? And then I say to myself, as we all do, I'm sure, I say, well, you're in the position now where you're a member of Parliament, been re-elected. What will be your legacy? What will be our legacy in terms of what we are trying to create? And I am not diminishing the efforts that have been put forth so far by our forefathers, and even all members here, particularly members who have been here a long time. like the member for Angliston, who's been here now a very, very long time. 5, yes, 5. But I just said to say that I believe that we are in a moment where we can let us elevate the debate on what the Bahamian people and what a greater Bahamas looks like, what a more prosperous Bahamas looks like. We will find enough issues that we have philosophical differences on. We will find those issues, but I believe that we ought to do it in a way that's respectful. I always say that I don't believe in attacking anybody personally. This is about attacking policies. I believe that there are great people on the other side. I just believe that they assign themselves to some bad policies, and they may say the opposite as well. But as it relates to this continuing resolution, another matter I wish to speak to, Mr. Deputy, that as we get into a vigorous debate on some of these issues, like I said, where there are irreconcilable differences or thorny issues between sovereignty of state and human rights, what I want us to be sure to do is to not shy away from what we believe we are and who we believe we are as a people, what the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas want the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to be, while understanding that we have our, as the resolution says, global obligations and so forth. Because a lot of the conversations that's happening globally, or tends to happen, is that when there is a determination by some that this is a principle that we want countries to sign on to, that this is a principle we believe that countries should embrace. The minute that there is dialogue in that sovereign state about a particular issue, that particular issue, there is sometimes an unfortunate move to brand that sovereign state because of that issue as taking a diminished position, as taking in certain countries, they view that those countries take draconian position. My point is that there must be an approach of a level of respect for the sovereignty of all peoples, and I trust and hope that should we get into those types of conversations where we ask the Bahamian people, what is their view? Whether in some formal way to referendum, or just hearing public discourse on issues, we take that into account and understand that we should not be apologetic for what it is that our people may want for us to be. And I, for one, as a parliamentarian, would push back on any movement where it is said to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas that because you are litigating the issue in this way, and these are the views of the people as if we are some banana republic or some backward country. My point is that what is interesting, Mr. Deputy, and let me just illustrate my point this way. The Democrats and the Republicans in the United States of America have different philosophical views. And on a number of issues, social issues and otherwise, they have a difference of opinion. And depending on which administration, which president from which party, depending on the president or the party, those issues are dealt with in different ways. Obviously, that's what governance is all about. Elections have meaning, and they implement their policies based on the fact that they were elected, and the people know that they have this particular philosophical view. But even when, for example, you have a Republican administration that may have a view about certain social issues, one thing is never said. that even as they go back and forth on those issues, it's never said that the United States of America is less diminished, or that the United States of America is this pariah country somewhere in the world. The point that I'm making is that at the end of the day, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas will and ought to determine what it wants for its people through the voices of the people. And while those tensions may exist with some of the discussions happening around the world, we are no different from any other country where our people tell us what they want for themselves. There's diversity in the world, and which means that every country has the ability to decide how that diversity is applied in its legislation, in its national politics, and no doubt its position globally. So as I wrap up, Mr. Deputy, I believe that this is an important resolution. I believe that as the member for Golden Gates would have shared, just a number of issues to the importance to the continued development of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. But I do emphasize, Mr. Deputy, that let us be prepared for the discussions that will ensue from this resolution today and as the weeks and months go on, to ensure that we litigate these issues and that will exist between the sovereignty of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and even the human rights discussions. Let us do it in a way that is respectful, that is thoughtful, that is diligent, but that makes no doubt that the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and what we ought to be and who we ought to be as a people will be decided by the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Centerville.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I rise today grateful to the Almighty God for the grace and mercy that He continues to bestow upon myself, my family, this nation, and its citizens. I stand, Mr. Deputy, on behalf of the residents of the historic Centerville constituency, who I continue to thank on a daily basis for their support they have reposed in me. Mr. Deputy, before I get into the crux of my debate, I would also wish to extend sincere condolences to the family of Calvin Jones, who was recently laid to rest this past weekend. We extend our deepest sympathy to him, his family, and his friends, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, human rights are the bedrock principles which underpin all societies where there is a rule of law and democracy, and this is universally acknowledged, and the Bahamas is no exception. Today, against the backdrop of multiple conflicts, humanitarian emergencies, and severe violations of international law, it is all the more essential that policy responses be firmly grounded in human rights, and that states comply with the binding obligations they have contracted when ratifying instrumental human rights treaties. This year, our beloved Bahamaland will mark 50 years since becoming a fully independent sovereign nation. As the Honorable Prime Minister and member for Cat Island, Runke, and San Salvador said to the United Nations General Assembly last year, we Bahamians are justifiably, I believe, proud of what we have accomplished in our 50 years of independence. We are free, democratic, entrepreneurial, and resilient, and our small size has not held us back from great achievements at home and on the world stage. The Bahamas joined the United Nations in 1973, and since then, we have embodied the principles of the organization, becoming an active and enthusiastic participant in many international initiatives that address global issues faced by countries like ours, including food security, climate change, and human rights issues. Member states of the United Nations are committed to its principles of peace, serenity, human rights, the rule of law, and development. In this regard, the Bahamas has either signed, acceded to, or ratified the several multilateral human rights instruments, such as the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol. Also, the Convention Against All Forms of Racial Discrimination in 1975. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. The Convention on the Rights of Children, etc. As a result, the Bahamas acceded to, ratified, and signed on to these international conventions and covenants. The Parliament of the Bahamas has a role to ensure government's compliance with its international human rights obligations.
Yes.
And in translating these international human rights obligations into national legislation and policies. Mr. Deputy, this Parliament represents the voice of the people. We all have been duly elected by the majority to protect their interests, which includes the promotion and the protection of human rights. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has noted at the UN General Assembly that Parliament is tasked with overseeing the implementation of recommendations made through the United Nations Universal Periodic Review Mechanism, as well as by other international and regional human rights mechanisms, and ultimately, the strengthening of the rule of law. Currently, there are only 2 parliamentary human rights committees within the auspices of member states of the Caribbean community. Only 2. One established in Trinidad and Tobago, and the other in Suriname. When adopted, the Bahamas will become the 3rd CARICOM country with such a mechanism, further establishing itself as a leader in the community on such issues. Mr. Deputy, the Parliament plays a critical role for the realization of human rights at the national level, which then directly facilitates the government's compliance with its human rights obligations on the regional and international levels. Yes. This would include the translation and implementation of recommendations arising from regional and international human rights mechanisms such as the Universal Periodic Review, the United Nations Treaty Body System, and the special procedures of the Human Rights Council. Having legislative oversight and budgetary powers, the Parliament is best situated to ensure that human rights are protected and promoted for all. The establishment of a Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights demonstrates the commitment of the government in this regard. The United Nations Human Rights Council was established in 2006, replacing the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. This body exists to promote and protect the human rights of people across the globe. The Bahamas was elected to serve a 3-year term on the council in 2018, which is another example of this country's commitment to the rights of people and correcting any deficiencies as we move forward. Mr. Deputy, I have to take this time to note particularly that our very own Deputy Director of Legal Affairs, Ms. Jewel Major, is the first Bahamian and person from the Caribbean elected to serve on the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee. And I wish to commend her and the hardworking staff at the Office of the Attorney General in this regard. Mr. Deputy, the Parliamentary Human Rights Committee shall be given a mandate as broad as possible, covering all human rights as defined in national and international law. The composition of this committee, as mandated by the draft principles on parliaments and human rights, is provided by the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. The Parliamentary Human Rights Committee is to be comprised of members of Parliament with human rights interests, having regard to the principle of pluralism, non-partisanship, gender balance, and respect for all human rights. To encourage diversity of participation, the composition of the committee will be balanced. The committee will consist of 5 members from the House of Assembly and 3 from the Senate, which will include the Attorney General, for a total of 8 members. It is intended that the House will be 3-2 in favor of the government and the Senate 2-1 in favor of the government. Also bearing in mind that the goal remains to have gender balance at all times.
Of course.
The committee is mandated to develop and publish terms of reference to define, inter alia, its working methods, the frequency of its meetings, its quorum, a procedure for agenda setting, means of communication, involvement in other forums such as national mechanisms for reporting and follow-up, secretariat services, and modalities of consultations with stakeholders such as national human rights institutions, civil societies, or individuals. The committee shall also have access to external independent human rights advice as required, including from the National Human Rights Institution, legal professionals with expertise in human rights, academic experts, and representatives of civil society organizations, or other relevant professionals with expertise in this area. As one of the main functions of the Parliament is to scrutinize legislation and oversee the work of the executive in fulfilling its obligations, thus this committee, which emanates from Parliament, will ensure that this aspect of Parliament's function is executed. The responsibilities of the committee, to name a few, are to encourage the ratification of or ascension to international and regional human rights instruments, to lead the parliamentary oversight of the work of the government in fulfilling its human rights obligations, to introduce and review bills and existing legislation to ensure compatibility with international human rights obligations, and propose amendments where necessary. Also, to review and draft national budgets from the perspective of the implication on the enjoyment of human rights. The role of the committee regarding the international human rights system is as follows. A, to participate in the national consultations held in preparation of and during the drafting process of reports to the international and regional human rights mechanisms, to review and comment on the government draft reports which the state is required to submit to the international and regional human rights mechanisms, such as the Universal Periodic Review, otherwise known as UPR. Also to participate in the UPR and in sessions of the treaty bodies, either as part of the government delegation or on its own. Also, to lead the parliamentary oversight of the work of the government in implementing recommendations of international and regional human rights mechanisms. And lastly, but by no means leastly, to meet separately from the government with special procedure mandate holders of Human Rights Council, treaty body members, or UN officials dealing with human rights and regional human rights bodies when they conduct a country visit. Mr. Deputy, no such entity as a Parliamentary Human Rights Committee has ever existed within the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And there is no such entity appointed by the Cabinet of the Bahamas to date.
Right.
Thus, with its establishment, this committee will be the first of its kind, and yet another step that the government is taking to concretely address human rights issues in keeping with national, regional, and international obligations. Mr. Deputy, the UPR was established by United Nations General Assembly Resolution 60-251 on my birthday, the 15th of March, 2006. But not the year.
I was just gonna say. Looking at
You're young to be
Yeah, not the year. I would wish. The mandate emanating from this resolution directed the Human Rights Council to, and I quote, undertake a universal periodic review based on objective and reliable information of the fulfillment by each state of its human rights obligations and commitments in a manner which ensures universal coverage and equal treatment with respect to all states, end quote. According to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UPR is designed to prompt, support, and expand the promotion and protection of human rights around the globe through, inter alia, the reporting and reviewing processes and provisions for technical assistance and capacity building. The review of human rights in all 192 member states of the United Nations takes place once every 4 years. Accordingly, as a member state, the Bahamas is required to submit to the Office of the High Commissioner regular national reports on legislative, judicial, administrative, and other relevant measures relative to human rights in the Bahamas. Earlier this year, the Bahamas submitted its fourth national report for the UPR. The national report describes the current state and implementation of human rights in the Bahamas, as well as the fulfillment of recommendations emanating from the Bahamas' first UPR National Report and Review in 2018. The drafting of the fourth UPR was spearheaded by the Office of the Attorney General, assisted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and representatives from the Interministerial Mechanism, National Reporting and Cooperation Mechanism, otherwise known as the NRCM. Mr. Deputy, the Bahamas has been slated to be reviewed by the Human Rights Council on its fourth national report in Geneva on the 3rd of May this year, next Wednesday. Subsequently, the Bahamas' fourth national report for the UPR will be adopted on the 10th of May, 2023. Uniquely, the adoption process of the UPR permits member states to negotiate their positions on recommendations subsequent to the submission of their most recent national report, as well as their review. In light of the foregoing high and technical level representation in Geneva for both the UPR review and report adoption of it is of critical importance for the Bahamas. In this regard, the delegation will be led by the Attorney General, who will be accompanied by representatives from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Education, Social Services, and Health, as well as other colleagues from the NRCM. In addition to delivering the national statement, it is expected that the delegation will also field questions and receive recommendations from member states at the review. The government of the Bahamas has established its commitment to the UPR process from inception. Being one of the first countries to participate and having consistently presented on time, we expect that the review will be a positive one that will provide additional strengthening to our efforts to ensure that the rights of every Bahamian citizen are protected. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this resolution is another step in the right direction as we continue to grow as a nation and as a people. The rights provided to every Bahamian in our Constitution and statute laws should ensure that we are all free to pursue our lives in the way we see fit within the parameters of the law and with respect for our fellow man. There are those who would wish to restrict others because of their beliefs, their race, nationality, sex, lifestyle, etc. There are also those who disagree with some of the conventions and safeguards that our country have signed on to internationally. However, these same people enjoy the same freedoms that those who need these protections do also. The Bahamas will and should continue to expand the rights and freedoms of its citizens. The Bahamas will and should recognize its increasing diversity. We should positively exploit this diversity for the betterment and development of our country and for all Bahamians. Mr. Deputy, just as the United Nations is a representation of all people across the globe, this Parliament and colleagues who occupy this space represent all Bahamians through the support of the majority of registered voters in each and every constituency in this archipelago. Therefore, it is incumbent upon this body to safeguard the human rights of its citizens and to remain in compliance with the conventions to which we are a part. With this being said, Mr. Deputy, as I take my seat, I wish to note that despite our small size, over the past 50 years, the Bahamas has and continues to play a pivotal role in ending some of the most egregious human rights violations in modern times. Parliament would recall that the pending administration played a key role in its call and unrelenting work in ending apartheid in South Africa. This work was publicly acknowledged by the late Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa, when he visited the Bahamas in 1994 to express his personal thanks to Sir Lyndon for his efforts. The statement, known as the Nassau Accord, negotiated in 1985 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, at the 1985 Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, was a turning point in freedom of South Africans from decades of minority rule and ending the occupation of Namibia. The second black president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, also, well, my name is Joe Moshaka, also visited the Bahamas in 2004 and conveyed his thanks for the prominent role that the Bahamas played in the South African liberation struggle. In 2018, the Bahamas was elected by the United Nations General Assembly to serve during the periods of 2019 to 2021. The election of the Bahamas was the first time that a CARICOM country attained a seat on the council. In more recent times, our Prime Minister has been fearless in speaking truth to power by calling for the adoption and implementation of programs to provide for compensation from the developing world for the impacts of climate change being felt by the developed world. I believe that the creation of this committee is a continuation of the successive work to ensure that fundamental human rights are provided for all people. Mr. Deputy, with that being said, I support the resolution. Centerville supports this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, I would like for you to join me in congratulating Mr. Wes Underwood, who represented the Samuel Guy All-Age School in the 26th Bahamas National Spelling Bee competition that was held at Breezes Resort on March 19, 2023, which he won. Mr. Wes Underwood will now represent the Bahamas at the Scripps Howard Spell-Off in Maryland, in Baltimore, Maryland, US, from May 31st to June 2nd, 2023. I wish to congratulate Wes for a job well done, and all the best to him and his family and his coach as they travel to the United States, where he will represent the Bahamas.
Which constituency is from?
Oh, he's from the greatest constituency in the Bahamas, North Eleuthera.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, it's the appropriate time for us to break for lunch. We shall return at 3 o'clock this afternoon. A member of the side opposite will be on the floor.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House be suspended to 3 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The business of the House stands suspended to 3 p.m.
All rise.